Welcome to the Crimson Engine. My name is Rubidium. It has been a very big couple of weeks in cameras. Canon launched the C500 Mark II. I did a leak video on that, so I wanted to cover off some of the things that they did and didn't include. And Sony came out guns blazing with the FX9, the not quite an upgrade, sort of something that fits above the FS7. And oh my God, what a camera. We're going to talk about that. If you're in the market for a sub 20,000 full frame raw digital cinema camera, I didn't believe I'd ever say those words, but you now have two really great choices. So we're going to look at how these two cameras compare and which one is right for you. So Canon went all out with the C500 Mark II. They really cut into their C700 full frame market by giving people almost everything that $35,000 camera has at a $15,000, $16,000 price point. They also made it modular, which is great. So you can customize it to the job that you have. They gave us internal RAW at 6K or 5.9K, all sorts of amazing things, and a price of 16,000 US that everyone was really kind of shocked at. Same price as the original C300. But not a week later, Sony came out with the full frame FX9 that has a lot of the features of the C500 Mark II. So we're going to see where the individual advantages for both cameras lie. Form factor wise, the Canon is smaller and lighter. It is far more suited to going on a gimbal, going on a Steadicam, going on a crane. The FX9, in contrast, is much more of a shoulder camera straight out of the box. It has that extendable, that inbuilt handle extension. You can put it on your shoulder, you can start shooting. It seems to be more for the ENG crowd, though I can't imagine that ENG people or electronic news gathering people want to shoot full frame with all of the shallow depth of field that gives you and more critical focus. So the C500 in its small sense is smaller and lighter. The FX9 will be more capable of shoulder stuff and probably more dedicated to shoulder stuff. This is a tripod or shoulder mounted camera. Maybe they saw the video that I did a couple of weeks ago about autofocus being ready for prime time as a real cinema tool, but they have migrated their pretty good autofocus from their DSLR and mirrorless cameras into their digital cinema cameras with the FX9. You get all these points of autofocus, recognize faces, you can have all kinds of settings of switching between them. I would go out on a limb and say it won't be as good as the new upgraded C500 Mark II autofocus because Sony's sort of a generation behind. It'll probably be Sony's FX9 autofocus will probably be on par with the C200, but the C500 Mark II is going to get an upgrade in dual pixel autofocus and be probably a little bit better. But I'd love to see that they're incorporating it in their cameras now and really pushing Canon to develop theirs further. So to resolution, the Canon will shoot 6K right out of the box to the CFast Express cards internally in the camera. It'll shoot 12-bit RAW 6K. When it's released, the Sony camera won't shoot 6K at all, not even externally. It's still waiting on a firmware upgrade that we're not sure when we'll get. Sony says it will add these features after the camera is released, so a little bit of a question mark hanging over that. The main reason for this is Sony, the FX9, still uses Sony's proprietary media. The XQD memory card and the bitrate of these cards is not fast enough to record 6K, especially not 6K RAW, unlike the Canon that went up to a new recording media, CFast Express, that does have the capability to do 6K RAW internal. You'll never be able to do RAW internal to the FX9. You will have to add a second module, which makes the camera bigger and heavier. But if you're shooting in the studio on a tripod, that's not really a worry. Actually, it makes your pan and tilt movements even smoother to have a heavier camera. I think these are going to be about $2,500 US, so you're adding to the price and to the weight to get RAW from your full frame 6K sensor. The C500 Mark II also has a modular system where you'll add dedicated recorders, dedicated V-mount battery holders, other different out possibilities, but it can do a lot. It can do much more than the Sony as far as 6K and RAW in the camera. Sony needs extra modules for that. Both of these cameras have internal stabilization. Canon is able to apply the movement and twist and shake of the camera, that gyro data, to the image and stabilize it as you're recording. It does crop in on the sensor to give you give the camera that room to move, but it will, if you want a quick turnaround and you're shooting handheld and you want it smoother, you can bake that into the image and deliver straight away. Sony, on the other hand, has gone with a metadata solution where it tracks the camera movement, adds that as a data file to the clip, and then you can use at the start just Sony's software, but eventually hopefully After Effects and DaVinci and Premiere to use that data to stabilize your footage in post. It's sort of like, rather than having to track with Warp Stabilizer, the camera will give you all the camera movement data and the lens data, and you'll be able to fix it as you go. Different solutions. I would say that the Canon one is a little bit more powerful, but no one's really seen it in the wild. We just have to, go with the manufacturer's specifications. Both of these cameras have 2 XLR inputs, mic input, and a scratch track internal microphone. The FX9, interestingly, gives you 4 little dials, so you can adjust all of those, but you can only monitor 2 of them on the screen. The rest you have to go internal or into the status menu for. Canon only has 2 dials, and then you modify the level of the other 2 tracks internally. So I said earlier that Canon's camera came in cheaper than expected. We were expecting a $20,000 to $25,000 camera. It came in at $16,000. Sony have come out guns blazing with a $10,000 full frame raw camera. You can't do raw until you add another $2,500 module in the back of it, and not sure what the media will be. But yeah, amazing price. This is interesting because it's interesting too that a lot of the specs of the camera won't be available at launch until later. It's almost as though Sony has been developing this camera, and then once Canon released the C500 Mark II, they announced it to sort of to steal Canon's thunder and say, hey, look, our camera does everything your camera does. It's $6,000 cheaper. And they actually won't have the firmware written to use the RAW or even the 6K of the sensor until 6 months, 12 months later. It's a pretty interesting marketing strategy on Sony's side. The reason that Sony can do such cheap cameras is because they are the biggest sensor manufacturer in the world. Canon makes its own sensors for its own cameras. Sony makes its own sensors for its own cameras, but then it also makes sensors for Panasonic, for Olympus, for a lot of other manufacturers. So they're able to make the sensors cheaper because they have the technology and they have the economies of scale. So the most expensive thing in a camera is the sensor. If Sony's producing them cheaper than everybody else because they're making more, they're able to produce a cheaper camera. Cost isn't everything, but on paper, having a significantly cheaper camera is going to be a big advantage for Sony. I personally, between these 2 cameras, would pick the Canon any day of the week. That's not because it's a objectively better camera. It's just that I have hundreds of hours, maybe thousands of hours shooting Canon images, post-producing Canon C-Log 2 and C-Log 3, dealing with the Canon infrastructure. I'm very much wed to that world. I know how to get a good image. I like working with those cameras. The couple times that I've had to shoot on FS7, I've hated it. I've hated the colors, though Sony have come in and kind of got rid of their dead skin tones and added another more cinematic color space and gamut for this camera. So we'll see what that looks like. But I personally don't want to relearn all of that on another camera platform. It's so much easier for me to go from my C200 into a C500 Mark II with very little learning curve. I would have to start over to work on a Sony camera, and that's not something that I want to do. That is how these 2 cameras break down. Thank you very much for watching. Leave your questions in the comments. I'll get you more as things develop, and I will see you next time.